COVID countermeasures for the Winter Olympics in Beijing don't sound like a lot of fun. Welcome to the Mix Zone. It's the weekly review of news from the world of the Olympics from Around the Rings. I'm Around the Rings founder and sometimes editor emeritus, Ed Hula.
And I'm Gerard Farek. I'm the managing editor of Around the Rings. We'll have more on the situation in Beijing in a moment. Also ahead, Boxing Federation AIBA says it's making strides toward restoring its tattered reputation. Madrid sets sights on another try for the Olympics. And the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee starts searching for a new chair. But first, let's head to Beijing, and we're finally finding out a few things of how it might work this time around.
How it might work. It'll be a challenge, that's for sure. It sounds like we have the first indication from the IOC in Beijing 2022 exactly how they're going to employ the coronavirus countermeasures, and it's going to be very similar to what happened with Tokyo, except perhaps a little stricter, a little bit less flexible than Tokyo was. But the big takeaway from that, I think, is no overseas spectators to be allowed, although there will be spectators from mainland China allowed, if they can work it all out.
Yeah, and of course the IOC and the IPC, the Paralympic Committee, were both in on these discussions, and they're both happy that at least there'll be some sort of spectators there. But it is, I mean, for the rest of the world, their family and friends and spectators won't be there to cheer them on, so that's got to be a disappointment.
Yeah, the sponsors as well. I think they'll be severely limited on the kind of exposure they'll be able to get in China, and there certainly will be no hospitality programs that the sponsors usually conduct during the Olympic Games. So again, I think a disappointment there as well. Not only family and friends, but spectators not allowed to go to China. And then once there, it's going to be very tightly controlled. You won't be able to pop out of the bubble, and 21 days of quarantine if you don't have vaccinations. That's a pretty big club to beat over anybody who wants to be an anti-vaxxer in Beijing.
Yeah, I was thinking that okay, they're not requiring vaccinations per se, but they might as well be, because who's going to want to go through 21 days in a quarantine? You know, I just don't think that's going to happen. They also say that if you can prove you have a medical exemption that you can't get the vaccine, that they will look at it on a case-by-case basis. And there was no mention of anything to do with religious reasons. It's simply medical exemptions. So I don't think there will be too many of those allowed.
And even with people who are vaccinated, daily coronavirus testing is supposedly part of the regime for Beijing next February.
And what about, we still haven't heard anything, right, about a torch relay.
Right, other than they're going to have the flame lighting ceremony in ancient Olympia, middle of October. I guess firm date, we're still waiting for word on that from the Greek and the Beijing organizers, but no word on how that torch relay might be held across China. So still a lot up in the air. We're waiting for the issuance of playbooks that precisely describe the rules and regulations that need to be followed for journalists. Around the Rings will have a team of journalists along with other news organizations from around the world, but we were waiting the playbooks that were similar to what was issued for Tokyo to come out for Beijing. We're promised that will be in the next month. And one other thing to mention about Beijing is the hockey tournament and the doubts that are being raised now by the new president of the Ice Hockey Federation, Luc Tardif, who spoke with Brian Pinelli from Around the Rings just a few days ago, right after his election as new president of the Ice Hockey Federation.
Yeah, the problem is, well, and I think the Ice Hockey Federation knew that China is ranked 32nd in the world. So they're not a very strong hockey nation, but the idea was they would, work hard, find a way to improve their team, and at least be respectable when it came to playing in the tournament, because every host has played. They were given the entrance because it's traditional that the host nation have a team, even if it may not be, even if it couldn't have qualified on its own merits. The problem apparently, though, is that China has not done its work. And right now, especially with the bringing in all the NHL players now, which is, of course, great for the tournament, but for China, it puts them at an even larger disadvantage because now the other teams will be even better. And nobody wants to see 15-0, 20-0,
right,
whatever,
right.
Name a score. And so now that leaves the Ice Hockey Federation with some hard choices, one of which could be that they remove China from the tournament, and I think it's the 11th place team, which is Norway, would be then brought in. And I've read that Norway has already been told that they might be in the tournament. So it sounds pretty bad for China and Chinese hockey.
And they're in a tough bracket too. I understand the Chinese will have to play the United States, Germany, another powerhouse or two. So be tough sledding for them. Let's talk a little bit about boxing and what they think is happening, what is taking place as far as their efforts to restore their reputation with the IOC. Richard McLaren, the Canadian attorney who's been poking his nose into the IAAF, the Russian doping scandal, has also been investigating AIBA. And he says, shockingly, that there was corruption at the tournament at the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. What more do we know about that?
Well, he said it's a people problem. It's it's the structure. He says the institutional structure and guidelines that AIBA had set up wasn't the problem. It was the problem that the higher ups in the federation decided that the rules didn't apply to them and they would do what they wanted. And he didn't name names, but we can easily figure it out when he says the then president of AIBA and the then executive director of AIBA at the time, 2015, 2016, were the ones, ultimately responsible for the mess that became of the tournament with the many questionable decisions made. To the point where even people who didn't know a lot about boxing would have watched a match and said, wait, this is not possible. This guy didn't win this match. And so, C.K. Wu, the president at the time, and
who is still an IOC member, I would mention.
And Karim Bouzidi, who was the executive director and who apparently was the point man who led all of this stuff to do this. Those are the problems. And I would say that the old phrase culture of fear, which we hear often, we hear in the weightlifting federation issues right now as part of the problem of you either do what you're told or you get thrown out of refereeing or judging or whatever. And a lot of people may not, didn't want to follow, but they did because they didn't want to lose their jobs. And so I think too, it has not been said, but I think this reinforces kind of one of the IOC's big worries about the thing that has to change at AIBA is you can write all sorts of rules, but the culture there has to change.
Yeah.
They have to want to change. And the fact that a lot of the same people are there, whether or not they're guilty or not, maybe they're completely innocent, but without a change in the culture, people are still going to find their way around the rules. AIBA has put in place a lot of rules now for judges and referees ahead of the latest World Championships, which are coming up in a few weeks. And, including bringing in McLaren's group, to do research and background and checks on them. But I don't know, AIBA has done a lot, but whether or not the IOC is going to, at the end of the day, be willing to believe that the culture has changed, that's kind of still up
Still
in the
to
air,
be proved.
Yeah.
Well, trying to prove itself, Sebastian Fest, our editor of Around the Rings, talked last week, a few days ago, with Alejandro Blanco, the president of the Spanish Olympic Committee. And he says Madrid is eyeing another bid for the Olympic Games. Never say die. This will be the, I guess, sixth time maybe they'll have tried to bid within the past 20 years or so.
It would be nice if they could pull this off, especially given their track record of coming up short.
And they're excellent hosts of sports events, by the way. I mean, it would be a shame because it's a great place to have an Olympic Games, but there's so much other things weighing against it, including time. I mean, they're looking at 2036 as the earliest for a possible bid.
Well, you could say that gives them plenty of time, but in the new way of doing things, who's to say the IOC doesn't award the 2036 Olympics in 2025 or 2024 even, given the way things are working. I mean, it's 11 years ahead of schedule to give the 2032 games to Brisbane.
So it's very difficult to see. For cities which have dreams of hosting the Olympics one day, it's getting to be very difficult to mount a campaign, a plan for an Olympic Games that might happen 10, 12 or more years from now. And the things that could change between the time the IOC awards and the actual time it comes to put on the games. I see the time police are chasing after us. Very quickly, we ought to mention the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is beginning their search for a new chair. Suzanne Lyons, coming to her term limit as a member of the USOPC board, will step down next year at the end of 2022. But I understand the board has already begun discussions about their search, who will be, whether it will be someone from the 15-member board of directors. Won't be any of the IOC members. They're not eligible to serve as president. Might not even be one of the current members, maybe someone they recruit and bring to the board next year. So it will be interesting to see what happens with that.
And don't forget, there's, besides our mixed zone in English, there's Zona Mixta in Espanol with Sebastian Fest and Miguel Hernandez. Those, if you would like to tune into that, we will have that also this week.
Escuchar para Zona Mixta, por favor. How's that?
That's good. That's good. Much better than I could do. So anyway, that's it for this week's Mix Zone from Around the Rings. I'm Gerard Farek.
And I'm Ed Hula. Let's hear from you. If you got something to say, let us know. Comment at aroundtherings.com is where you can always find us. Thanks so much for joining us this week.
So long.
Bye-bye.